Thank you for the warm welcome and introduction. I'm usually told that I talk loud enough, so I will make sure to use these to enhance my vocabulary. Can you hear me now? Awesome. So we got a lot to cover today. Wonderful world of worms. Thank you very much to the earlier presenters. Carol Ann, you set me up for success. I really appreciate some of the foundational information. So the way I'm gonna work today's session is we've got about 40 minutes left. So I'm gonna try and do my presentation about half of that time, 20 minutes for the slide deck. Just a quick moment for me to change the camera and then do another 15, 20 minutes showing and handing out the bins for those who are doing that for today. So welcome. All this to say, vermiculture. Today we're going to talk about how to create a worm bin. I've been doing it since 2021 when everyone was sort of stuck inside and had lack of things to do. I went ahead and bought my first bin. And like Carol Ann, I had gotten started with composting. I've got a couple of those tumblers. I found I was just generating a lot more waste. And so I believe I went to the Seattle Tilth at the time and did one of their classes like this and came home with a pile of worms and what to do. So I'm enthused that there's such interest in this. It's a growing subject that a lot of people are interested in. And so let's get into the deck. There we go. What is vermicomposting? So vermicomposting is the process of using your worms and the microorganisms that are within the environment to go ahead and convert your organic waste, your food scraps, your plant trimmings, into a valuable soil for plant minerals and nutrients. Ultimately, it's just worm poop. It's interesting to find out that in the research that I've done, the average American has about 200 pounds of food waste a year per person, per household. So you can imagine a lot of that goes to the landfills. And the third cause in the research that I found was the third cause of methane gas emissions was from food going into landfills. So I was from the city of Seattle back 3, 4, or 5 years ago, and we had local pickup service. That was great. Out here, I'm in Dewato Bay. It's a lot more remote. We don't have those facilities. So my choices are either to go on the ferry and take it home where I still have service, or to take it to the dump locally. And again, I'm trying to close the loop. I'm trying to be self-sustainable, like a lot of us are, and reduce what goes into landfill. So this is a great way to, who doesn't create waste, right? So every day, I'll get into my routine in a bit. What I'd like for Annabelle to do is actually go ahead and hand out a couple of these, one per row. I've harvested my vermicasts, and I want to show you what it looks like. And you can touch it if you like. There aren't going to be any worms in it. It's just to get an idea of what you're going to end up with. In terms of how is it different from compost, before I get into the benefits, it's a lot less involved. The worms will do the work for you. So there's not a lot of this churning. And the other key difference is that, as Carol Ann spoke, it's a thermophilic process when you're doing hot composting. What does that mean? That means you're getting the bacteria are reproducing at such a rate that you can get 120 to 140 degrees in that hot composting process. Well, worms, they're gonna die at that high of heat. So we're talking about at most a mesophilic, which is ambient temperature, like maybe 60 to 80 degrees. And we'll get into the specifics a little bit more on that. The other terms that we talk about is vermiculture. Vermiculture is basically the culture of raising worms. So different purposes. If you're going to vermicompost, you're probably more interested in the end products. This rich soil amendment that we were talking about that aerates your soil and everything. If you are a fisher person, or if you have exotic animals, you might want to raise earthworms to feed them, and you're going to fatten them up. So that's the vermiculture. Think of it as vermiculture, your animal husbandry, right? You're taking care of a pet, and you're creating the environment for them. So you've got to be mindful of them. It's not about the NPK. It's not about the bin setup. It's about the worms. And that's what I try and focus on. It is a commitment. I almost asked for adoption forms for those of you who are getting them today, but we'll save that for the Humane Society. Let's see. Benefits of vermicompost. It is a lot more refined, and there are a lot more, like 6 to 11 times more NPK nutrient ratios than you would find in basic compost. We know that it's going to go ahead and aerate the soil. It's going to improve your water retention. It's due to that microbial activity. It's really a community that you're raising within this environment. Yes. Uh-oh. I'm hard to hear. Oh. Maybe I put it in my pocket. Can you hear me now? Hello, hello. Sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that. I will try and talk loud, but it's not going to help on Zoom, regardless of how loud I talk. So let's try and get these up a little higher. Okay. I will continue to talk. So it also helps to fight the pests and the diseases that may be within your soil or on your plants. It's also been found to help seeds germinate more quickly. As you can see, if I remember the red pointer, yes, there you go. Incorporation, a little goes a long way. So that's the important thing to know is you don't need to add, more than, studies have shown, you max out at 20%. Oops, go back. At 20%, so a little goes a long way. They found that and this is just showing by volume, 0%, that's what the seedlings start as, 5%, 10%, 20%. And really you max out at 20%. You could go up to 40%, but you're still only going to max out at the same level as if you had 20%. So it's one other big difference with compost is that Rhonda Sherman, who is a North Carolina University Extension specialist, she's like the worm guru for North America. And she was just an extension specialist who was hired in the 90s to help them deal with recycling. And everyone was worried about bottles, cans, newspapers. Nobody was talking about food. So she sort of fell into vermicomposting and now holds, I think, her 23rd or 25th annual conference on vermicomposting in North Carolina. So she's an excellent resource. And I'll point out that at the end, I base a lot of, because as a land-grant university, we are science-based, we're not fad-based. So there's a lot of information on the internet. I would just say, treat it with suspicion, basically. So let's see here. In terms of a little goes a long way, I was talking about the 10 to 20% by volume. I went my first time of getting a batch, and I went ahead and just threw a whole bunch on top of a ficus tree that I had, and it really threw off the pH. So a little bit goes a long way is the important part of that. In terms of talking about the worms, so we've got 7,000 to 9,000 species of worms that exist. So when I started, I was thinking, well, I could just dig up a hole in my garden and there I go started. They eat dirt. Well, scientists classify within I can hear it now, thank you. Scientists classify it within 3 different areas, basically, of, sorry. Let's go back. Sorry, challenging here. So 3 different types of earthworms in general, based on where they feed, where they live in the soil strata, and how they breed. So scientific names, I translated the Latin for you, basically. Epigeic is upon the earth, endogeic is within the earth, and anesic are out of the earth. So when we think of earthworms, we're thinking of the anesic. They are deep burrowers, about 6 feet down in the soil, especially this time of the year. They're looking for dirt, worms. They're the ones you're going to see at the end in the evening who are coming up to look for food and mates, basically. Endogeic, you'll rarely see. They're more in the sort of mid strata, say about a foot deep, and they're going to dig horizontal burrows. Again, these 2 eat dirt. Epigeic is surface dwellers. They are going to be living in the forest floor. They're going to be living amongst your duff. So in cow patties, in leaves, that sort of fun stuff. The other thing to point out is that of those 9,000, there's only about 5 that are appropriate for vermicomposting. In North America, I would take that down maybe even to 4. There's tropical varieties that are utilized in like India or other. So Icena fetida is the red wiggler, tiger worm, manure, composting worm, any of those things. So my next slide, I want to show you about the worms for composting, because I got confused when I started doing the research for you. in that you'll see on here, these are all the sort of common names. Red wiggler. Well, I thought I was getting red wigglers. Well, is it a red tiger? Is it an African night crawler? Is it an Indian blue worm? The only one down here that's not appropriate, it's more for like outdoor composting. And I should preface this by saying, my talk today is geared towards indoors, small bins. We won't talk larger, mid-size. That's for a future discussion. But basically, the Icena fetida. So if we go with the Latin binomials, that way we know what we're getting when we're talking to a buyer. So I wouldn't, again, because it's hard to distinguish them. You can see right here, that's what the purpose of this. It's really dark, I'm sorry you can see. But here's the biggest worm you can see. That's probably gonna be an earthworm. Maybe I have an Icena fetida. There's like 5 or 6 other worms here from just the wetness of my earth, and I don't know what they are. So I'd be hesitant to put them in the bid. I wanna set you up for success and have a really good experience with this. So the reason we recommend Icena fetida is because they are those surface dwellers. So they are epigeic worms, and they're going to live in the top 4 to 6 inches of soil, and they're going to be moist environment. They're going to eat up all those microbial critters, and it's kind of like that old nursery, you know, I don't know why she swallowed the fly. I guess she'll die. So the fly, you know, she swallowed the fly, and then the frog follows, and so on and so forth. That's what's going on in your bin, basically. That's the soil food web.
It doesn't matter. What would happen if you kind of add a little bit of these and a little bit of those, and you still well done?
That's a great question. I would say for those who are, oh, the question was, what do you do if there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that in terms of critters, are you thinking? Yeah, I wouldn't worry about them. I wouldn't overstress. For those who are squeamish, I mean, you're dealing with worms. They're worms, you know? So for the first year, honestly, I just ignored my bin, really, and it was successful. I didn't know what I was doing. I went to a 15-minute, 30-minute presentation, did some research, and voila. I happened to be successful, but there were challenges along the way. So if I can get through just the presentation, I'll give you some of the information, then we'll get into the hands-on. So these are just, I'm not going to go through every variety, but these are just some of the ones, common ones that you'll find in terms of appropriate for in-home composting bins. The other thing I want to point out is, yeah, you could get the fishing worms, the red wigglers that they sell at like the Walmart or something like that. But look, there's only 50 of these in a cup. And it's really going to take 1,000 worms or a pound to start a bin the size of a, those on can't see, but the size of a Rubbermaid bin that's about 10, 15 gallons. You would use the surface area of about a square foot for 1,000 worms or a pound of worms on average. So you can imagine if those are like $4 each, and there's 50 of them, it's astronomical. A quick bit on earthworm anatomy, because I want to get into the fun part. Just to show you, really, the business end is this end, really. Everything that comes out that end. But this is where all the organs and information about identifying them. So just going really quickly, you can see it's about 1/3 is the head, and that's composed of the most identifiable band, the clitellum, is what worms, when we see a little picture of the worm, there's that band, that's what that is referred to. And that's an indication of sexual maturity in the worm. So at the front end is a mouth, but they don't have teeth, they don't have eyes, they don't have ears, they don't have lungs. So we're responsible for their environment. And what they do is they're not going to take a bite out of that banana skin or that banana peel. What they're going to do is they're going to wait for some little bacteria to break down that. And they're going to suck up with their mouth. It's a tiny, and it's all it does is suck in. It's going to suck in those nutrients, process it through. They've got a crop that is going to kind of store it. And then like birds, they have a gizzard. So you need to give them some sort of grit. It's usually found within the soil of sand of soil, or if you've got an earlier vermicompost bin, you would just recondition or inoculate your new bin with that. I'll talk about some other additions you can do to benefit that. But so 1/3 for the business, or 1/3 for the survival end, 2/3 for the business end. So all of that is basically where they're doing the magic, if you will, of the mucus within them and their own biomes and their microorganisms are going ahead and consuming. That's the huge difference. They're consuming, you could pre-compost what you've got and then feed that to the worms, and they would go ahead and on the back end, you're going to get so many more nutrients than what you started on the front end. The other thing to know is that they are about 70 to 95% water. So they need a moist environment. And just to show you the underside, again, here's the prostonium, that's the little mouth hole. And this is the underside. Here's the clitellum. This is just in terms of They are hermaphroditic, meaning they have both sexes, but they still need a mate to reproduce. And let us get into that. If we can lower the lights. Bow, chicka, bow, wow. It's all about the mating. So as I talked earlier, you've got the clitellum, and what they're going to do, that's where the ovaries and testes are. They're going to sort of head to toe and rub up against each other and do their business. And it can take, so basically they'll do their business. As it shows down here, they can do about 3 to 4 cocoons a week. There can be on average 3 hatchlings within a cocoon, and you can get up to 42 a month per worm. So that's about 500 per worm. So astronomical. And that is how you can sustain or share your worms without having to buy them. The other thing about the cocoon formation, so I love this. This is from Mary Applehoff's Worms Eat My Garbage book. It's a classic from the 70s, and it's all still true. So basically, the clitellum is where the action of the mating juices sort of combine. And then it's kind of like a hoodie is how I think of it, where the clitellum, it overpasses their head. And as you can see, it forms this little like lemon-shaped size. It's about the size of a match head. And in there, you can have up to 7, but usually it's about 2.5, 3. And they just look like little orbs. Here, I was so proud Papa when I saw he's actually coming out. I'm sorry I don't have the other shot had a dime in it so you can see the size of it, but they're minuscule. And this one, I just happened to get it. It looks like a gooey duck, right? I think I had a dream the other night. It must have been the birthing of these guys. So you can see they can proliferate pretty quickly. Ideal living conditions. So the environment, because we are responsible for that. We're going to contain them in a bin. We're worm wranglers, basically worm farmers, if you will. The ideal conditions, they like it moist, they like it wet, and they like it airy. Like us, they are comfortable in a 60 to 80 degree weather. So right now, this time of year, it's challenging. I've wrapped mine in blankets, and it finally occurred to me I've got a space heater. Turn that on the area. Oxygen is, you just want to make sure that there's holes in the bin so that they can breathe. And then your pH level, we know 7 is neutral on the pH scale. Anything lower is going to be acidic. Anything higher is going to be alkaline. So we're shooting for that 5 to 8 range for the pH. Now let's talk about some of the worm bins that you might encounter in the world. I encourage everyone to reuse, upcycle, free cycle. In fact, I want to do a shout out to all of my master gardeners. There are too many of you to mention, but volunteers who not only helped me to get buckets, but also to get materials. I've got newspaper, shredded paper, all sorts of stuff. So thank you again very much for those contributions. 3 types of bins that you'll encounter. There is the static bin, which is usually the storage containers. That's the most popular you'll find online. There's all sorts of DIY, build your own systems online. This is the system called a flow through that is popular to purchase. And this is how I started my first one. You start with a stackable tray. You do one at a time. It's showing you the full setup, but you fill one tray. I'll get into the particulars. I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. And then this is the sort of Cadillac version where it's probably the most expensive, but it's called a continuous flow through. It kind of looks like a big upside down jelly bag to me. I'm getting into the specifics on a static worm bin. So it's kind of like the Rubbermaid bins that we're all used to. The image here just is useful in that it shows you've got to have holes drilled into the bin. And that's for drainage on the bottom, so you don't get liquid accumulating. And know that you can do it within wood. And this is for an outdoor bin. Again, we're not going to talk about it, but I wanted to show you this is how you could grow. If you've got a family that's generating pounds and pounds of food waste a week, you might need to go bigger, and that would be an outdoor bin, which there's plans online that you can find, but again, it's beyond the scope of today's discussion. But just know that the bigger you go, the more flexibility your system will have. The other thing to note is wood will breathe, but it's also very heavy. So any bin, I would encourage you to keep it indoors, especially this time of the year. If you do have a porch, you would want to be located out of the direct sun. You want it in the shade. You want it to stay that way. So let us move on to the next slide, which is talking about the flow through bin. So here I was telling, this is convenient in that You've got the drainage tray already built in. It comes with a little spigot, but if you're managing, you won't have that leachate, that brown goopy liquid coming out. And then they've created what they call a worm ladder. It's just a piece of plastic that fits into that. And so that's your container. And then that's your first tray that you would start with your bedding and your worms and your feeding. The beauty of the system is once that tray gets about 2/3 up, well, you just stack the next tray on top and they can go through the perforations in the next tray to get to the food. So you would stop feeding the first tray and only feed the top tray. And you keep doing that. They come with 4 trays. They say they're expandable up to 6 or 8. They really get heavy, but that is the system that I've got 2 of those that are working very well. The continuous flow through worm bin, again, is sort of like the higher level where you're feeding from the top and you're harvesting from the bottom. So the worms are sandwiched in the middle. There's a flap, you just lift up, and you never have to see or touch the worms if you don't want to. I haven't used the system myself, but the beauty is that it sort of Velcros together and you can just take that apart and harvest your worms out of there. And there theoretically shouldn't be any worms in the bin because they are traveling upward where the food is. Let's see, what else? Bedding materials. This is the fun stuff. And since Carol Ann did a lot of it, I'm not gonna read, but you got your browns, toilet paper tubes. I get so excited when the Amazon guy comes, but it's not because of what's in the box, it's because of the box. It's great. There's different qualities of cardboard. You can see this one, it's honeycomb. You wouldn't want a cereal box. That's usually just gonna be kind of pressed cardboard, I think is what it is. These have holes, gaps. The worms love crawling in those little spaces. So it's great. I would say make that, shred them. I'm always collecting free newspapers wherever I see them. Printer paper is fine. The colored inks aren't as much of an issue. Most are using the soy-based inks these days. Coconut coir, I won't waste time talking about the benefits versus that and everything we've talked about. I've got some here. You really have to soak it to be able to fluff it up. But any of those. And then the other thing you want to give them is some grit. And that can consist of glacial rock dust, azomite, or green sand is what I've got to show and use for today. Limestone would be another one, but you want to make sure it is agricultural limestone and not your hydrated lime because that can burn. What to feed worms? Well, I think we already got a sense of that from earlier. So any fruit, I like to think of them as my vegan friends with a delicate constitution where they're any vegetable, any fruit, tea leaves, you're not going to want to give them anything that's high in acidity. That's hence the citrus or vinegar, dairy or cheese, no meats. And it's not that they won't eat it. It's more the problems it'll cause in your bin. So that's where I say on an outdoor composting bin, I might be a little bit more flexible with those things. I did make an experiment in my limited example of the buckets that I'll show you later. And I fed them a little bit of bread, a little pasta, which are the sort of moderate, you can limit these things. But it was too much. And I ended up getting a disease on a couple of worms. So live and learn. So a little goes a long way. The other thing in food is don't forget. Anyone ever see these bags? Every Starbucks will give you, or any coffee shop will give you grounds if you just look at the bin that's there. Free, cheap. I just save them for my compost tumblers or my vermicompost. They love it. They love it. So let's get on, finish through this. Like what they don't like. How to feed the worms. Basically, you're going to use a kitchen collector like this as a tabletop on your counter, and you're just going to go ahead and put in all your food scraps. Some people just have the bin even directly under their sink, and they'll just peel their carrots right into the bin. So again, you're going to want to make sure to wash any pesticides off or anything like that if you've, as Carol Ann told us earlier, your particle size is going to affect your decomposition speed. So larger surface area means it's a lot easier. Again, that worm can't come up and take a bite of the proverbial apple. They need something else to sort of pre-digest it into smaller chunks for them, and then they'll consume them and be consumed in your bin. So if you find you're worried about fruit flies with the collector bins, keep it covered, or you can keep it on a porch. I empty mine like once a week. I sort of curate it, if you will. I'll put on my gloves and I'll be like, because I got too many questions. I used to have 3 different bins on the counter and it was way too much. So I'm like, fine, I'll play with it. And I'll put on my gloves and I just go through my bin and I'm like, onion, what do I do with onion? Big bin. Citrus, big bin. meaning my outdoor compost, oh, here's a piece of lettuce. I can go ahead and give that to the worms. So the other thing you can do is to create that surface area. If you're finding it smelly, you could either put your fruit and vegetables, if you've got room in the freezer, and freeze them, and that will help to break down the cell structure. Just make sure you de-thaw it when you go to feed them. The other thing I like to do, and I was doing this too much, is you can go ahead and sort of pre-chop up. And I don't know if you can see, but this is basically just like, I want to say a pound worth of food scraps that I curated, and then I just put it through my Cuisinart, and I chopped it up. And that will, it will work great. The other things, I'll show you, there's even such a thing called worm chow, we'll get to. So let me go ahead and get through the information, because I think the showing is better, more informative. Here's just an idea of the decomposition process. This is my system from the Worm Factory 360 is what they're called. So I began this tray 3 weeks ago, and that's my top bin I'm feeding. You can see I just give them a little bit. You don't want to overfeed. That is, you want to wait until they've consumed what you previously fed before you give them another batch. So this is 3 weeks ago. This is a month earlier than that, 7 weeks ago. You can see there's a lot more of those brown coffee grain-like things are actually the vermicasts. And you can see my cardboard scraps and paper are still being consumed. And here it's a little bit more refined. You can even see a little worm or two. So that's about 4 months or 3 months, 12 weeks ago. So I probably got another month in this bin before I can harvest it. Next. What's in my bin? Again, thank you, Carol Ann, for sort of introducing this. As she talked about, you're going to inoculate your compost bin, same thing with your new worm bin, with microorganisms so that they have something to feed on, right? You're building a community. So like I was saying earlier, for those who are squeamish, the first 3 months, I didn't really look through my bin when I started, because I was like, what are those white things crawling around there? What's that? What's that? It's fine. There's going to be mites. There's going to be springtails. There's going to be protozoa. There's going to be things you can't even see unless you have a microscope or a loupe. For those who are interested, it's fascinating, though, because you see who's prospering based on what food you give. But it can also be an indication that there may be a problem in your bin. And usually, the bigger problems are going to be related to your food source. So in terms of harvesting, there are 3 general methods. Like I say, the beauty of that jelly bag system is that all you got to do is take the bag off theoretically, and voila, you got the worms. That's what they claim with the tray system as well, is that, oh, they all crawl up. I've still had to filter out. So know that it's, and here's, you can see this is a 6-quart container, and that's about what I fill on a weekly basis. And I'll curate, they get maybe 2 quarts of it. The other 4 quarts go to my bigger compost bin. One of these bins equals about that much vermicast as well. And I get that about every 4 months. So I could probably go through each of these bins twice a year and get cumulatively about 25 gallons of harvested vermicast. That's my process. I'm not so interested in fishing or worms for fishing, but that is a possibility. So again, your feeding and your bin methods will vary depending on if you're growing for the vermicasts or you're growing for the worms. But in general, it's going to be the same sort of thing. How to use vermicompost? I think Carol Ann already touched on that. Basically, you can put it into your seedling starter mix. You can put it into your transplants or into established plants. And just again, a little bit goes a long way. How to use vermicompost. Oh, this is just, the other thing is you can also go ahead and create what's called, I think I screwed up my slide here, but that is showing my bin. Sorry, that is showing my bubbler. It's cut off the bottom. It's basically a brewing tea, compost tea is, and if we've got time, I'll show you that, but we're running slow here. So I'm gonna go through and steps in terms of starting a worm bin. Basically, it's pretty easy. You build your worm bin or you buy it, and you want to make sure that it has a lid, a bottom tray, and holes. Plastic, if it's plastic, you don't want see-through. You want it to be dark because, again, they don't have lights. They're afraid of they're not afraid. Being exposed to ultraviolet light will kill them within an hour. So you want to make sure to use light as a strategy. So if in a new bin, for instance, like you would do for a child who's afraid of the dark, you want to leave the light on for them. First 2 days when they're getting adjusted and acclimated to their new home, they're going to be curious. And if you're afraid of them, slipping the top and coming out, easy thing to do is just have a light source above them for a day or two and let them get acclimated. Anyway, locate them in a basement, a garage, a porch, somewhere that is going to be comfortable. I've got them in my basement. It's about 55 degrees. So you would go ahead and shred up your paper, soak it, put it in the bin, and you want to make sure that it's moist. You want to let it soak for about 5 to 10 minutes in the water so that it thoroughly gets absorbed, not just surface. And then when you'll squeeze it out, but then you'll have to aerate and fluff it up to add the air back to it. So when you squeeze it out, you only want like a couple drops of water. You don't want to be throwing in water. And the other thing is you don't want to directly pour water into your bin ever. That's not a great strategy. Using a mist is like a fine spray of rain for them. So, so you would then inoculate the bit. So you'd add the bedding about halfway, inoculate it with some vermicasts, as well as your azomite or your green sand. Here's my green sand. And then you would just go ahead and gently add your worms on top. You can feed them or not in the first 2 days. They'll kind of be freaked out and want to get used to their environment. So I would monitor them on a regular basis, like every 2 days to begin with, if not every day. Just don't harass them. My other half was telling me, just leave the poor things alone. I was going there nightly. And, look, I got a cocoon. Woo! So I'll demonstrate this rather than go through all the steps. And here's just a quick movie on my worms. Healthy bin traits. How do you know I'm succeeding? Well, if it smells earthy, forest-like, for me, it's kind of like a pine scent, and that's a certain type of bacteria that is generating that smell. Other thing is you don't want to feed until the food is gone. Your contents should be damp, not soggy. If you pick up your worms and look at them, they should be moist and glistening. They should have the skin of a 2-month-old or something, I guess. The bedding is disappearing. It will shrink lower. And you'll also notice that you're accumulating castings and cocoons, those little things that I showed you. Other than that, common issues. The number 1, 2, and 3 are overfeeding, too much moisture, and fruit flies. And they're all related to the same thing, which is overfeeding. Overfeeding, over-moisturing. I've done it. We want to take care and we want to see results and success. So pay mindfulness that this bag of coffee grounds, a little goes a long way. It's going to be very wet. So your food source is going to be a source of water. And what else? One thing I thought of last year was, I was feeding alfalfa meal to my sorry, it's not going all of a sudden. There we go. Awesome. We are finally to the point where I can end and give you the talk or do the demonstration. So here's my resources. Is that right? Let's see. Did I skip one? Nope, that was right. Yep. Okay. So in terms of my resources, I've got Kindle, so I couldn't bring in the books, but these are the resources and the titles for each of them. It's a handout that you'll be able to get. Worm Farmer's Handbook is the one that I was talking about by Rhonda Sherman at North Carolina Extension University. This is Mary Applehoff's Worms Eat My Garbage. There's even a good book by Amy Stewart that's just more a writer talking about worms. The links here will take you to the Washington State University. I think it's in Lewis or Thurston County program. Worms Recycle Your Garbage is a free handout from North Carolina. And then this Vermicompost Success, this bottom one here, is actually for a podcast with Joe Gardner. So if you like to listen to things, he interviews Rhonda Sherman. So with that, we're now going to go ahead and switch over to here and show you the fun stuff. Bless you. I guess I'll take questions for the Zoom, and I'm sorry, we're running later than we expected. So I'm going to try and keep questions to about 5 minutes if we can. and then get into the hands-on portion and the demo. So my apologies. If you have time, I would appreciate if you can stay, but I realized you were only expected to be here till noon, so forgive my going on and on. I've got lots of information that I want to share, and this is the fun part, the showing stuff. And we will build the bins, but I've already done the hard part for you, and let me start demonstrating that while Tessa sets up. Hopefully I'm not moving too much. Cool, thank you. So let's talk about the bins. I want to give you an idea of ones you can build. Can you see this? Awesome. So this is the easiest way. This is the sort of static bin that I was talking about, although if you stack them, then it becomes one of those flow-throughs. So I've got holes in the bottom. I don't know if you can see that. I only use a 1/2 inch diameter. Yep. And on the sides, I've got just a couple. And then in the lid, controversy on lid. Some say do, some say don't. The reason to not is that you can get over evaporation drying out your, so these little louvered things are a nice solution in that it blocks out the light as well. How much can you see in this? So here's an example of one of these bins. So you can see I've just used, you can use wet newspaper or wet burlap bags, what I'm using here, just to keep the top moist. And, oh, the fun thing I didn't show, sorry, feeding strategy. Where did I feed? Where am I going to feed again? There's something called a pocket strategy. And worms, you don't want to put it directly down into their poop. So I've created this little grid, and whatever works for you, I fed them here last time. So next time I'm going to feed them here and work my way around the bin. This is a strategy you could also use in terms of harvesting. So there's such, we talked about the sideway harvesting strategy. In that instance, I would push this because it's really, you can tell there's a lot of bedding material still. So this is about, I think, December I started this bin. So it's maybe a month old. You would want to push everything to the side and just feed new bedding and feed them on the right-hand side. And then in another 2 weeks or a month, harvest the left-hand side, and then just flip-flop each side that way. Great. And when I'm feeding, the first thing I'm going to do is I've also got a little thermometer. So I'm going to keep that both in the bin and in the room so I know that I'm within the parameters that they're comfortable. To feed, I would, when I lift off the lid, I'm going to look and see, are they reacting to the light? I don't really have a lot of light here, but are there a lot of them accumulated? Does that mean they're escaping from something they don't like? That is also why you're going to go ahead and feed in a particular area and not cover the whole bin. If it's something they're not liking or there's too much of, they need an escape area in the bin to go to. Sometimes you'll be like, I don't know where my worms are. They're really going to be hiding maybe together because it's too cold. They're going to be in the pockets, in the corners or on the edges, or even on the lids. So don't freak out. In terms of feeding them, I'm going to just take a dull pointed. The pointy ones might stab them, or using a spade. So you're just going to be gentle. They're pretty resilient. It's like just a little hole like that. I'm not going all the way to the bottom. And then I'm just going to go ahead and take. Really, I'm serious. Talking about the amount of worms for a 1 pound worm, it's claimed that they can eat up to their full body weight. That is not true. It's been revised to about 1/4 to 1/2 of their body weight a day. So if you think about a pound of worms at 1/4 pound, that's 1/4 pound a week. So maybe 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of food material, which is, this is a quart container. That's the max I would feed this size bin. Surface area, 1 square foot. And this is about a 14 by 14, so it's a little larger. Equals 1,000 worms or a pound, and you would only want to feed them a pound of worms. You're going to give them, what is it, 1/4 pound, so that's 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds a week at most. No more higher than 1 inch. And I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle this in here, dump in. You could use a measure, and I would, like a 1/2 cup with the size bins we're going to start out is more than enough, because we're going to be working with 5-gallon buckets, 1/3 of the size of this little guy, okay? So that's a strategy of feeding, talking about harvesting, and then I just cover them up. Oh, the other thing I like to do is I've got one of those multimeters, so I'll go ahead and find out what the pH level, just see how it changes throughout the process and that they're well. What else? So that is that. I don't know that I'll be able to show you in terms of the time that we have of harvesting, but like they say, you don't really dump and basically you could take this and you would dump it into piles, or let me do it on this so people on the Zoom might be able to see. If I were to take this You could build little pyramids and let that sit there for about 5 to 10 minutes, or wear a headlamp. Interesting thing, they don't mind red light, so you could do that to observe them, but they're not going to flinch away from it. So here's the messiest strategy of harvesting is you make these little piles. You take what's off the top in terms of compost or bedding material, and then you give them 5 minutes, shine light on again, and they'll keep working down to the bottom of the pile. It's messy. I would just rather dump the whole thing into a self-made sifter. And this is about 1/8 inch. I use 1/4 inch for my compost. The 1/8 inch is for the vermicompost. And this way I can sift it, get the bedding material out, and put that into a new tray to start a new bin, grow my family. Otherwise, then the castings just drop that. And that's what you all saw in those containers is vermicasting is not pure vermicast. It's also partial bedding. It's also those microbes and all that fun stuff. Great. So now, did we take Zoom questions? Because I know I'm all at noon and I want to start the hands-on. Yep. That's a great question. The question was, should the worms be native to the area when you're acquiring worms? What are native worms? I did that search because I was curious about if that question came up. My understanding is with the last ice age we had, most of the worms that were native are gone. They didn't make it through that. So they all came from like places like India or Egypt, where it was warm, where they have the crescent belt, right? And so over the years, or over the decades, millennia, it's our forefathers and mothers who came and they brought them with them. As we colonized North America, they came with us. Wagon wheels, they came in potted plants that you brought with you while you were going in the, across, go west, young man. So the one native that I did hear about is actually both Oregon and Washington State have giant earthworms. The Palouse worm, giant earthworm. It can be thickness of a man's pinky and up to 12 feet long. And it's going to be one of those deep burrowers. I think the last sighting was in 2004. And they smell apparently like lilies. They're just albinos as well. So great question. Thank you for asking it. That said, it is noon and I realize you may have other obligations. I'm sorry for going so long, but there's a lot to talk about and this is the fun part. So if you bear with me, I appreciate it. I would forego the harvesting because it's just messy and basically all I'm doing is separating out the worms from the compost. The fun part is building. So let me show you what we're going to end up. Oh, don't forget egg cartons. You can always use those. So those of you who have bins, we're not going to get them yet, but I want to show you what you're going to get. Or no, let's show you what you're going to end up with and then what you get. Where's my best angle? So here's one I started. I also forgot to mention labeling. It's important, I think, to at least put like a painter's tape sticker of when I started it, when I harvested it. You don't have to worry about it. Records are up to you in terms of how detailed you want to be. You can have a clipboard by, and you could be noting, I'm feeding every 3 days this amount of food just to see what your turnout is, if that's something you're interested in. Feeding strategy. Here's another one of those little things of, okay, maybe I put the thermometer. So I'm using a t-shirt just to cover up fruit flies. In this model, you can see you don't really need big holes at the top. It's just for air, so it's just little gaps there. So my thermometer in here is telling me it is 60 degrees. They're happy, and that's where I last fed, is where that is. I've covered it up with wet paper, but it's kind of hard to see. I left chunks, so you can see here's avocado peel. Here's a carrot. Here's some lettuce. I think there was some, oh, here's a little worm. So, if it's just detritus, it'll take them a while to go through. So I wouldn't feed them at this point if you can see what's in there. I wouldn't feed them. And it will take me about a month to fill all 3 of these. No, about 2 weeks to fill each bin. So I've got 3 systems. This is my current one that I'm feeding in. This is my middle one. It's a short guy because I wanted to see how he would do as opposed to, so 5 gallon. This is probably 2.5 gallon. And then here's what I started on 11. I think I started at 11.5. And my only challenge with this is that they get compressed because the heavier and all the moisture goes to the bottom of the bin. So it's just a container. So it's got no holes in it. These all have holes in the bottom, these 3 that I was showing you before for the feeding bins. So they can crawl in amongst the levels. They seem to like to hang out. You'll notice I don't have a lot of leachate. That's what that brown stuff is at the bottom of the bin. There's controversy as to whether or not it's good or bad. Science is still researching what's in or out of it, but you got to imagine what your inputs are variable. So it's going to depend on what you're putting into the bin. If it's stagnant or smells, that means you've got anaerobic versus aerobic bacteria. And if it's smelly, I wouldn't put it on my prized roses or on something that I would eat. So if you had bushes or shrubs that were struggling, you can try it. It might work. So that is what we'll end up with. And like I say, I started this in the election, November 5th. And here we are 12 weeks later, and I will probably have enough compost to fill one of those containers. So for those of you who have bins, now is the time to grab your bin. So thank you for your patience. There are setup bins over there. Let me just walk it through before I have you get up and out. You're going to get a kit, as it were. It's going to consist of 5 buckets. And let me explain to you what you've got. You've got the top bucket. So this is for you to have a, yes. Can I answer your question?
I taught cooking at Stadium.
Okay.
I had a student enter the National Cooking with Worms contest.
I heard about it, yeah.
He won using 1 worm out of his mother's worm bins.
Okay.
Chocolate cake.
Interesting. Interesting. Yes, there are recipes I found in one of the books that I brought. That was the worm book. And I was like, I don't think we're ready for that yet. Sorry. Good source of protein. I'm going to ask you to hold off on questions just for a moment. Let me get through this. Then get the pandemonium of people getting their buckets, and I'll take the regular questions while they're making their ruckus. All right? I really appreciate it. So you're going to get a 5 bucket system. The top one I was telling you is your gatherer, your countertop. And it's about a 2-gallon. Within there, you'll find a pair of gloves. So if you want to get messy or you don't want to get messy, you're going to find a little to-go container with castings. That's your inoculant. So that's about 8 ounces. And then you're going to find a little container, the one with the dragons on it, or I guess the artwork on it is going to contain your worms. You're going to get about 1/4 pound of worms. So it's about 200 to 300 worms or so, and they're bedding. So that's in the top one. In your middle one, then you've also got if that was a 1 gallon, 2 gallon, this is a 2.5 or a 4 gallon, and then these are 5 gallons. So this one would be to store. I highly encourage you, if you've got buckets, I've got pre-shredded stuff for you back there. I was going to show you how to tear newspaper. It's not that difficult, but basically no glossies. You would take, and go with the grain of the paper, and you want to just tear 1/4-inch strips like that, and put them into your bin, and you're going to add water into. So I've already got that for you. And sometimes separating them is the challenge. Just know your orange bin has got nothing in it. You've already got some shredded paper in one bin, and then you've got shredded cardboard in the other bin. So what I would advise you do, you can do it now or you can do it at home, is take your empty bucket. That would be for your own storing of compost and that sort of stuff. And just go ahead and, I guess I should build it, shouldn't I? Build it and they will come. When I say water, what do they do with it? I would go ahead and just start with an empty bucket. I find is easier. And I would only put like a cup or 2 cups of water. That's it. That's it. What are the 2 biggest issues you have with vermicomposting? Overwatering, overfeeding. Those are both going to create conditions that are adverse to the success of your bin. So I would go ahead and just take and throw all that in. Let it marinate for about 5 to 10 minutes. When you pick it up, you want to make sure it's fully saturated and moist and actually drain out. If you see drips like that, it's too wet. You're going to want to either add in more dry bedding or squeeze it out. But the challenge with squeezing is then you need to re-fluff it up. You need to aerate it because they want it to be more they want it to be wet and airy. So I would go ahead and combine in one of the 2. You ultimately won't need This is to grow in the future. So your basic system is going to be the orange bin is your container. So any leachate that does come out is going through the bottom. You would go ahead and put all your bedding in here. It's about halfway up. And then what I'm going to do is, oh, I've already got my pre-thought sometimes. So here's the inoculant. I go ahead and take that bin of compost, vermicast, and I'm inoculating the bin. About a handful or two. There's no real recipe. Caution, I've got shredded leaves in the back bin. I didn't include it in your kit because there's going to be things in here, right? There's going to be eggs from other critters. So some people might not want to go that step right away. So just, it's fine. It's there. It's already pre-shredded, but it's going to increase your microorganism community by a lot. And then there is, oh no, that was the core. That's why it was all wet. This is the shredded leaves. So I might just add a little bit of that. And then mix that all up. And when I'm sure that it's wet and it's not too cold, I'll take my worms and I'll just open up the container. See if I can pull them out. And there they all are. And I'll gently just place them on top. You don't need to dig them in. They'll do it themselves. They're going to shy away from the light. And then you would go ahead and put the lid on. And I did not review that. You have several lids. One lid for your tabletop container. You've got a orange lid if you don't want, if you need to build up the humidity. You've got a holy lid, and that's if it's too wet and you want to air it out. So, and then you've got one for storing your either vermicast or your paper products. And yeah, I see you have a question. I'm sorry? Grit. Thank you for a reminder. For grit, why do I want grit? Because like a chicken, they have a gizzard. So if you crush up eggshells, you could use that. Or, oh wait, yes, you can use that or azomite or green sand. Green sand is just glauconite, I believe is what it's actually referred to. It's a soil amendment. It's decomposed rock and things from the old seabeds before millennial ago. So it's harvested, and it's a great addition of minerals, not only to the worms, but to your ultimate vermicast or vermicompost itself. And you could simply also use crushed eggshells. Some recommend, if you're worried about salmonella, that you pre-bake your eggshells and you go ahead and, I've got a separate coffee grinder that I just use for garden projects. So you can shred that up. I found out this recipe for worm chow, believe it or not. You can buy it, but you can make it. And worm chow is basically, you can take cornmeal, alfalfa meal, and what else do I have in here? Some whole wheat flour, maybe some of that green sand, and I would just sprinkle. It's to fatten them up, basically. It's a very rich, so I wouldn't give them more than even a tablespoon in this bigger bin. So in this smaller bucket, I would give them just a dusting. And I've already done that with with the little to-go containers I gave you, just to satisfy them. They're going to be curious. I believe you've got both the Icena fetida and the Indian blue worms, Malaysian blue worms. You're going to find, I'm used to the red ones. They're a little bit easier to manage. The blue ones are curious. They're a little bit more active. So I'm sorry to have gone over. I want to give you time for questions. Those of you who are building bins, you can feel free to collect. And if you want to build it here, I'm happy to stay and help you with that. Or you can take them home. All you need to do is really add water. It's that simple. Let me start with Carol Ann first. Sure. I wouldn't recommend putting it outside at this point. I would say not until we get March. I'd say if you've got a closet, if you've got a pass-through garage area that stays above 55, really do not put them outside at this point. Thank you. That's a very good point. Yes, sir.
I don't know if you're still on Zoom, but also wants to go in grow in the future. 5-gallon buckets are really easy to find at Home Depot where you get the half gallon, gallon.
Great question. The question was, in terms of upcycling, certainly where to get the buckets. You can obviously buy from Home Depot, any of your farm stores or whatnot. And we actually got them donated because we're a nonprofit for the orange buckets with lids. Find out your local grocery store. Usually the bakery area will have way too many of these for frosting. Nobody makes the frosting, they just buy the tubs. Some places like Walmart, they want to charge you a buck a bucket. That's on their part. Anyway, they'll be free, so that's part of the challenge. Free cycling, you're preventing that from going into the landfill. Restaurants, a great source for food. You'll grow, and I'm beginning to think I'm outgrowing my smaller buckets. And yeah, we're good? Any other questions?
Yeah. Some people for bedding, animal bedding, they use straw. Some of them use the shavings.
What kind of shavings?
Well, some of it is pine
Sorry?
shavings. And
Yep.
some of it is like older shavings. So what would you suggest?
I would be wary with shavings of cedar or anything that's been, you don't want to use pre-treated lumber because that's going to have those poisons in them, basically, the preservative. In the back, ma'am. Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. That's a great point. So the woman in the back was talking about using the shavings, pine shavings from the gerbil, which is going to contain not only their feces, but also their urine. And that's one thing I glossed over in terms of animal waste. So I'm glad you bring this up, is that you would never want to put dog or animal or dog or cat or even bird or chicken into it. It's too hot. Well, the pet feces is one issue. It's going to be diseased probably, and you don't want to eat that. The best animal manure to use would be cow manure. Horses, if you know what their feed is and they're not dewormed or what chemicals are being added to their food. Goats, any ungulate would be fine. Okay. I would say try not to buy things. I would say try to reuse existing materials. Other questions? Was there anything on Zoom or are they gone? Oh, I'm sorry. For those on Zoom, you don't have to be hanging out. I appreciate. Sorry for going over. We're going to go ahead and make messes out here, dirty hands and dirty fingers. Feel free to send any questions you have to the garden hotline. I'd be happy to follow up on that.